So good morning, everybody. As Craig said, as we sort of roll into this, keep an eye on the chat. If you haven't seen the Menti website and code yet, it's in there. We'll talk you through it. Somebody had mentioned it's their first time here. We will absolutely talk you through it as we go. But before we go any further, it's important to us, and those of you who were with us in December will remember how John sort of revamped our land acknowledgement for us. John is our director of Equity, Diversity and Inclusion at State Associate Director, I think is the title. And the piece that I love that he said to us is, this is not a checkbox item. This is a small gesture that potentially has a very large impact. And so, as always, Craig and I would like to take a moment, wherever you are, we've lots of people joining us all the way across Canada today from the looks of the sign-up sheet. It's possible you're joining us and not even in Canada. Make sure you do say hello to us in the chat as well, depending on wherever you are. Just drop us a hello in there. I'm going to try something new today. This is my courage for January. I'm going to try and say hello in some of our traditional languages, and it would sound like this. Okay, abawastik, dada nastada, tansei, hello and welcome. For State, we're based on the traditional territories of the Treaty 7 region. And that would have been the that is the Blackfoot Confederacy, my apologies. The photo here shows the Bow River in the middle of winter. That's a current photo. You're going to see a different timeline later on today in our slideshow. The Blackfoot described the Calgary region as the Mohkinstsis, which is, that means elbow, where the two rivers meet, the Bow River and the Elbow River. So wherever you are today in Canada or beyond there, thanks for taking a moment with us just to recognize the great heritage of the land that we work, we play, and we live on. Thanks, Craig.
Well done. Thank you. It was good. Good for you for giving that a go. Excellent. And I see we've got some new folks in Ontario. Great to see. And Rob, good to see that you joined us this morning. So, okay, we're back at it in January. And we're going to talk about goal setting today, because everybody needs a real refresher, kick in the pants on their resolutions this morning. Actually, no, that's not it. But why don't we kick things off with the Menti, Jenny, just to kind of level set. And for those of you, again, joining us, go to menti.com on your phone or a separate tab in your browser. And it should be pretty simple after that.
Pop there you go. So this is what, oops, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, pop the code in and away we go. And so over to you. I'll be quiet for a couple seconds.
We're out of practice here. So what you should see on your phone is this screen, excuse me, or on your second browser there. And as you can see, some people have done, you can hit the thumbs up or the heart, and it just tells us that people are coming in. Menti is an anonymous polling tool. We'll move to the next slide. Don't worry if you're slightly behind. Craig has the website and the code in the chat. And you'll see here an invitation just to try it out. So you should be able to pick one of these, and you can tell us how your week is going. Where are you hanging out? Those of you that were with us as far back as September, I think this was the first Menti slide we did on, in September when we used Menti. And the numbers are stacking up just like they did in September, actually. We had a couple that had a horrible week back there in September. Thank goodness it's Friday. I think that's where I would be sitting today. What about you, Craig? Which one would you have?
I'm going to go somewhere between thank goodness and Friday, and it's been a week.
There we go. Okay. Yeah.
I'm going to go off the board, Jenny. So. Yeah.
And Craig, maybe we can put the code.
Right.
There we go.
Yep. Right there.
All right. We'll just let it. There's still some flowing in. We have to just have that timepiece. We'll let everybody get in there and pop their vote in. And this is how it works. I believe all our slides this morning are multiple choice. We'll do them all here and now, and then we'll be done with Menti. It's just simply a find out what's going on for you and your perspective on the conversation. As Craig said, we're talking about performance goals, ties in beautifully with New Year's resolutions. Actually, statistically, most of us, if you set a New Year's resolution, you're done. Mid-January, most people are done. 1% go beyond the middle of January. And I was listening to something yesterday that said what the top 10 New Year's resolutions were. Can you guess what the top one was?
Oh, I'm gonna have to say weight loss.
It was, yep. Yeah, there you go, Emily, as well. It came twice in the top 10, and only 26% choose to learn something new in their year. Those are my useless statistics for the morning. Okay, we have over 150 of you in here now. I'm going to move on this slide as well. If you're still catching up, you can just join the Menti as you get in there. The code and the website is in the chat. So there you go, right on board. Do you set New Year's goals or New Year's resolutions yourself? Yeah, pretty high on the, I'm loving the honesty in the room as well. Yep, they never get far. Maybe you're one of those middle of January people. Lots of people who perhaps do something different. Word of the year is one that pops up in this house every now and then.
Mm-hmm. I've seen more of that lately. I'm in the nope never group.
Fair enough. Absolutely. Yeah. As you can see, with the majority this time, you're on the board. And Emily's popped in the chat there. She does intention setting instead, and her word for the year is perseverance. It's a pretty good word.
Yeah.
I think mine so far, we're still fiddling with them here. Mine might be savor the moment. Okay, we're back over 150 for the sake of time. We don't have you for long. Someone said they have to leave at 9. We'll be done by 9. We always promise that.
Yep.
Let's move on one more. And now we're talking about your workplace. So we're getting a little bit more specific here. Who is it who sets the goals, the targets within your organization? Full transparency, this was affectionately borrowed from Corporate Rebels. If you haven't come across Corporate Rebels yet, look them up. I make no apology for the rabbit hole that you'll dive down, but there's some good reading in there for sure. It's actually interesting to see there's a lot of great practice in there where teams are involved in defining and co-creating their goals. And loving the right-hand side that we've got some color there. And a real moment of, yep, absolutely no idea is often a piece that we hear too. And as Tanya put, yes, for most people, it's a combination. Fair enough.
Interesting.
Okay, now when you're thinking about your performance goals at work, what do they primarily cover? Again, as Tanya said, we're going to see a bit of a mix, but what are we seeing? Is it just work goals that you're focusing on, your own professional development growth goals, or a combination of the two? And as always, we're seeing some good comments in the chat there of what people get up to in their own organizations. Feel free. That's exactly why the chat is there. And then if you do have a question for us as we get going into this, please feel free to pop that in the Q&A. It's much easier for Craig to track them from there. I think we have one more slide on here. I'll just give a couple more seconds. So nobody just with growth only as a focus, plenty with work and growth, which is healthy. That's good to see.
Yeah.
And a few of you with just work only as well.
Interesting comment, Beth, with the pandemic, it's all day to day. I can certainly
It's true. That's a really valid point as well. Yeah. And this will be, I think, as we get talking, another key piece is just how excited are you about these? And again, there's always some, yeah, you mean I was supposed to pay attention, and we know that happens out there. Thank you again for your honesty. Menti is anonymous. We don't know who you are. We just love that you tell us what's going on out there, I think. Okay, and I believe that's the last one, Craig. So thanks for playing with us out there. There's your introduction to Menti if you've never used it before. It's a fun tool. I'll stop sharing my screen. If you haven't popped yours in here, you still can. If you have popped it in here, feel free to exit from Menti because we won't come back to it again.
Perfect.
There you go.
Okay, so interesting piece there. The last slide, Jenny, actually really got me thinking, but that might be a rabbit hole. But how cool would it be if the goals that we were able to set actually had us up and fired up every morning? Like that for me is a little bit depressing to see. Right.
Oh.
So I think it kind of speaks to the reason we wanted to have this conversation is, why do we set goals in the first place? Why are organizations so married to in the most part, I'm sure there's exceptions at either end of the bell curve, but for the most part, SMART goals, OKRs, here we go. We're going to sit down and set them once a year. And then, we might look at them again every quarter, every half year. We might put them away and not look at them again until performance appraisal time, which is another conversation. But why do we do it and what's wrong with it?
So, and only because I think this is cool, I'm going to use the slide deck. And anybody who's come here lots is like, what? Jenny doesn't use the PowerPoints normally. I'll tell you why we use them. We're kind of married to it. And this next photo there, that's Calgary's skyline in 1966. Photo courtesy of my dad, who was here then. But we've been doing this for such a long time. So we're sort of married to the process. And companies like it, excuse me, because it gives us the potential to sort of coordinate what we're up to. It allows us to align. That's why that whole cascading thing began, because then ideally we'd have these vertical streams of alignment and we'd all be marching down the same path, theoretically. And again, theoretically, there's a ton of good motivation theory behind goal setting. And so there's the drive and the hope, which is a rubbish strategy, is that we'll get up and we'll just want to achieve this. And I think there's two problems with why we're not excited. One is the way that we do it. We've tried to simplify, process it, everybody comply. And you and I have talked about that lots. It doesn't really work when it comes to people. And then the other piece behind it is we've lost the spark. And for a lot of leaders, we're not excited. And we know if the leader's not excited, there's no way your team's going to be excited. Because if you're not talking about it, they're not even thinking about it. And so we don't set ourselves up for success to start with.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because I think somewhere along the line, the concept of setting goals and saying, okay, we need to strive to achieve something. And yes, I want to develop myself and I want to put some goals or guardrails or pieces along the way to guide me. But somehow, somewhere along the way, the goal setting got tied into performance appraisals.
Yeah.
in my experience, right? And so I remember in a prior life, you would literally go through and you'd have your 4 or 5 goals that would be on your performance appraisal sheet, and you would get rated 1 to 5 on your goal achievement, and they would have a weighting, and there was this mathematical calculation, and Craig, you're a 4.23. So it's like you never got up. Yeah, I don't know if that was good or bad at the time. It didn't really matter. The bonus checks kept coming.
You were 4.23. You weren't good or bad. You were just a 4.23.
Right. So, I think the question then becomes, okay, yes, we get that there's good reason behind setting goals, right?
Yep.
Absolutely. So how do we do it better? How do you set goals that are meaningful? How do you set goals that people can get excited about? Sorry, I keep coming back to that Menti slide. That one really got me, is how do you set goals that are going to get people fired up? And maybe you can't get everybody fired up. Maybe it's a matter of, again, the bell curve of distribution. You probably have 10% of your employees who are always going to be out there running after every goal no matter what. And you've got the left-hand side who probably are okay just with it being what it is. So there's a lot to unpack in that one. I guess I'll stop for a second.
It was like 4 questions in there.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So no. So I think let's take the last one first. Will everybody be excited and will everybody want to chase every goal? No, simply. And to me, that's a really key piece. So I think we've got the day job, right? There's a job that we have to do, and there's a way to approach those goals within there. And that's a team function. That's the leader driving it. I think to this point, my favorite book, if you're a reader on there, is still 4DX, excuse me, by Chris McChesney and Sean Covey. And so there's a way to do those day job goals. And we can talk about that a little bit in here if we want to. And then when we look at individuals, one of the problems, and you're right, they were attached to that performance piece. There is a mathematical equation, which quite frankly, very few people ever understand in an organization, which is one of the reasons that the conversations are so askew, because the leader's trying to deal with something that they just don't get. And so what we did was we followed this, everybody be smart. And what we're finding now, especially when smart's attached to performance, smart doesn't work. So, you know, when you think about it, and in case anybody hasn't heard SMART, don't go looking it up. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, timely. And so if we look at how that works in the workplace, specific, yes, we want to narrow the focus. We need to know where we're going. And if you do that, you've done exactly that. And so now you've almost persuading people not to think outside the box. So it's kind of a yes, be specific, yes, narrow the focus, and always, always, always remember 2020. Because if we learn anything in that year, it's you may set this goal and you're going down that path straight away. So can you be flexible within that piece in there? The measuring piece, we know a lot of people get that wrong. Lead and lag measures. What are you actually measuring? And to come back to the slide that caught your mentee, you can't measure effectively excitement, energy, interest, that kind of piece. And that's the bit that leads to the meaningful, the drive, etc. Achievable leads to complacency, and that's where it went badly wrong. And people, you know, if I do this and I get my bonus, oh great. Well, that's not setting anybody on fire. Relevant, of course. Like, hello, 2020s, let's get on with this. We need to be relevant. And the time piece, again, we need time. It gives us accountability, but it's a yes and. And so how do we get people excited? How do we get people inspired towards action? I think the easiest number one step is involve them. And that was really cool on the mentee. Lots of people were saying it's either our team co-creating or I set my own goals. And that's brilliant. Yeah. Because when I have ownership of it, I'm much more likely to care. And then the other piece before I stop talking is when you put that goal down on a piece of paper, if it doesn't jump up and say, yes, okay, start again. Because the problem is if you look at it and you're like, yeah, whatever, you'll think answering emails that are a complete and utter waste of time, but make you feel productive and busy is a useful use of your time rather than this thing that could drive us forward.
Yeah, Steve, I remember reading something. I'll have to see if I can find the article again. It was a piece I saw on Forbes, but talking about SMART and, you know, specific and measurable being good pieces to have. Yes, obviously we need to be able to, you can't, you know, how do you measure the blob from the movie The Blob, right? Like you can't have something just so amorphous and so on, but achievable and realistic kind of put guardrails on that bring you back down, right? And I think Steve Jobs said something about the company is there to put a dent in the universe. How do you put a dent in the universe? By setting achievable and realistic goals.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
So it brings in the whole concept of, you know, BHAGs, your big, hairy, audacious goals and so on. So it's, for me, it's, and I think I saw Lisa make a comment here in the chat as well around it being the same every year. Sorry, one frustration I have is that each year the goals seem to be exactly the same, especially the ones tied to the company metrics, making it hard to get motivated. So how do you, as a leader of a team or an organization, you know, find a way to reinvigorate that? Yeah, you're always going to have your financial goals as a company, right? That's always going to exist. But how do you convert that into something meaningful to your team? I think that becomes the real challenge as a leader, to make it purposeful and make it exciting. So Mary has a question here. How do you get leaders to support building growth and learning into your annual goals in addition to the more measurable targets? How do you get leaders to support? I would also add, how do you get your employees to buy into the whole concept of building growth and learning? into your annual goals?
So, and actually that ties into what you were just saying in there in terms of that purpose of meaningful piece. The bit that we often miss is, if you think of goal setting as a ladder, we set the top rung and we don't come back with, how do we do this? 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 And so number one is, how's your ladder stacked for your team? But the other piece, I think this is the interesting piece that gets missed, is if you've set that top ladder, what do you need in order for your team to get there? What do you need for success? And 9 times out of 10, you need growth of some kind in order to grow your numbers, grow your business, grow that. And what does that growth look like? And the time frame that we're working in, what's going on in our society out there around us, is all about growth. We are changing, transforming, whatever you want to say, at such a rapid speed that we're constantly needing to grow our skills. And so let's take, you want to corporate training, you're going to sell corporate training, and you've got to hit this figure. Now that's come down from the C-suite. That's your figure. That's your top rung of the ladder. What do you need to get there these days? Maybe it's the skill of data storytelling. We can't get there unless our team can tell better stories and engage via stories. There's the growth within there. And we know that growth and challenge, there's another little piece to the story there, are conditions for high performance. We're motivated by those. Go right back a decade ago to Daniel Pink's work: autonomy, mastery, purpose, mastery. We like getting better at things. So now we've got that growth. Okay, what are the skills that we need to grow in? How are we going to grow? And please, 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 this is a two-way conversation. This is not all on the leader. That's the biggest, another piece that gets missed. And so what do we need to grow? How are we going to grow that? And I read somewhere, and I forget whose it was, for the sake of what? And so I want to build my skill in this, Craig. This is how I want to grow this year. For the sake of what? For the sake of X. There's your growth in there. Do the two align? Yes, great. What do you need to do that? What does that look like?
Yeah. And I think sometimes too, I've always found as a leader, some of the challenges where you have employees, I think sometimes looking to provide you the answer of what they think you want to hear around how they should grow, versus really sometimes that great self-introspection, I think, is tough to see for some people to find, and really be vulnerable enough to step up and say, hey, I need to work on this to move to the next step. I don't know if it's a matter, I'm not articulating this quite right, but I think some folks are afraid to share it. And I think some folks, frankly, just don't do the mental work to really truly self-assess and say, this is what I need to, I'm good with what I'm doing right now. It's worked for me. Why should I change? All right. Couple questions here. And then Brent, I also saw your comment in the chat, and some of this will all get tied together. From Deanna: if your leader is excited about their goal, but you can't really seem to get excited about that goal. But you really can't seem to get excited about that goal. Unfortunately, sometimes as a worker, you have to put goals out there to align that aren't very exciting. Thoughts on that one?
Yeah.
I should say, I don't think exciting is the be all and end all. I think I just found that Menti slide a little, it was a bit of a Debbie Downer. So.
And I think, let's be fair. We're not going to be excited about everything. There are parts of my job that are not exciting, but the bits that I love, the excitement, the goals that we strive towards, that's what fuels the fire to get through the other stuff. If you're in a position where nothing is exciting and it's not working for you, you're not a tree. Move on. Okay, you don't have to stay where you are. And what does that look like? Move on might be as simple as having that conversation with your leader. and really, the chances are you're missing something. And that missing something might be a self-reflection, but it might be a big picture piece. We don't understand the context. We often leave that out of goals as well. It's what is the big picture? What is the big context? Where are we heading to? And for the employee, because this is a two-way thing, what's my contribution to this? That's a great question to ask yourself at the beginning of the day. In fact, I may have it on that last slide. What's your contribution today? And that gives us a piece that we can do. In we have a set of goals that I'm just really not excited about. That 4DX strategy works quite well when leaders employ that, because it talks about, how many priorities do you have? Because if we're trying to do too many, we're spread too thin. Priority, until I think it was about 20 years ago, there was only the single version of it. You couldn't have priorities. It is a single thing. There's one. And then the other piece is, how are you measuring that? Because as human beings, whether you love the sports world or not, we like to play a winnable game. And so what's the measurement in there, and can you see the needle moving? And so maybe it's the scoreboard, maybe it's how it's being measured and dealt with. And when we can see the needle moving, doesn't mean that it's going to light our fire, but it does mean, okay, I'm making progress. And there's a study, I think it's in Mind Gym, that at the end of the day, if people feel that they've made progress, they will describe their day as great, simply because they've made progress. We like that.
Oh, absolutely. So you touched on a couple of things there. So the comment that caught my attention that Brent put in here is, there are short-term goals, monthly, annual, but with lifelong learning, how do you ensure you weave short-term into long goals? Don't be distracted by your term goals. So it kind of goes back to the question that we talked about earlier is, what if your goal doesn't fit nicely into the corporate calendar year, Jenny? Right? Because we often set these goals on January 1st or whatever your fiscal year may be, and say by December 31st, this goal will be finished or achieved. Right. Yeah. And then again, I think the piece that Brent, it's a good one when you're looking at that growth piece. How do you time bound? How do you put a limit on that growth versus saying this is part of a longer term, ongoing, forever process?
I think my first question is, can you stop it? Like, why do we go fiscal year for goals? Because it fits the tax season, and because it used to be done by, or still is in a lot of cases, done by performance management, and probably because somebody said so and it worked. And so, we need some, like, there's no doubt about it. We need some that have to fit by our Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, like day job. Do it. We've got to do that. But when it comes to learning, if it's going to take me X number of years to get to here, great, there's the top rung of my ladder, and you and I know we're invested, we're going to get to here. But when we start to say, how are you going to do that, that will break down, and that will fit in as to our number of steps. And in fact, there's an image. Let's find this slide here, because this stuck with me when it was years ago that I came across it. I'm going to try technology here. There we go. And this says so much just in this one. And unfortunately, I can't even give credit to the image. I don't know whose it is, and I can't read the signature in the bottom left-hand corner. No. But there's so much in here. And what is your plan, and how will you get there? And at some point, and I think you and I had this conversation along the way, do I give up on my goal? Is the goal wrong? My first question before you give up on a goal is the plan wrong? Does the plan need changing? And then to look at the goal. And the other thing, and it's the second bullet under get aligned, there is, are you setting the boundaries? And that comes up time and time again in here is, what are the opportunities that you're observing? There are things that we need to say yes to in order to climb that ladder. And there are things that actually is equally important to say no to. And that might be those 10 emails that just actually don't need answering.
Yeah, it's amazing how often you can just let email age and die. So but that's a totally different conversation. So you touched on a couple of things, and I think one is around this time frame that I'd like to come back to. The latter I want to come to as well, because it triggered something for me around stretch goals. But there's a question here that I want to get to as well, is thoughts on goals tied to your bonus and or variable pay, where you're calibrated against everyone else in your pay grade, even if the job is very different. It's meant to reward high performers and keep them motivated in theory, but I see the opposite.
Might be better if I say nothing.
No.
I really struggle to understand that method. And the reason, there's several reasons that I struggle to understand it. Everything, I think, this was a tweet yesterday, 85% of the work we do requires collaboration. It's one of the intelligences we have in our new leadership journey, collaborative intelligence. And so giving individuals a bonus based on their performance is rubbish, because we don't do things alone. And actually you're setting your team up to be competitive and not to work together to create and innovate. Because why, Craig, would I give you any of my good ideas if it means you might be a 4.23 and I am only a 4.19 and you get more than me? And in our human brains, it doesn't work. And yeah, I really struggle with that system. And we're seeing more and more, the big companies, there's lots of famous ones. Netflix springs to mind, who have just changed the way that they do it. That book's not bad either, that No Rules book from Netflix explains how they do it. And it just leads to so many potentially not brilliant practices.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the only caveat I may put on that, and again, I have a bias around business development, been doing it for a long time. There is a place, I think, for some individual recognition on sales performance, et cetera. That being said, I know there is has been a ton of movement in the past number of years around shifting financial reward for sales organizations to team achievement versus individual achievement, right? Because you do create potentially some of those destructive behaviors. So totally agree. It's an interesting one. I like that. You're getting lots of support there, Jenny.
My big smile.
We have somebody talking about rubbish. So well done, Jose. That's good. You definitely hit a note, Jenny. So I want to come back to stretch goals.
Yeah.
Right. So this is also an interesting one for me. Okay, because I think it kind of contradicts this whole concept of SMART, achievable and realistic, your image of the ladder. So we create the ladder, right? Yep. As a leader, you create a ladder, you put the top rung on it and you say, okay, when you get here, you've done it. And then in the next breath, we always turn around and say, but how much more can you do? So thoughts on, I guess it goes back to what's your intent of the goal. If the goal is to make sure that you're achieving what you need to achieve, right? My question is, why do you set that as the goal anyway? Because everybody knows that's what you need to do, or maybe that just is, right? But why do we put this? Why do we feel this need to put a stretch on top of it? Is it's almost like we're afraid to say to somebody, okay, you've achieved your goal and it's only 9 months through the year. We're worried they're just going to take 3 months off. I don't know.
So two pieces in there, I think, and it's a lot to do with leadership. And so the first one, and remembering when we had Doug with us before Christmas, some point, October maybe, and he talked about, as we're creating, as we're innovating, 4 out of 6 things will fail. And so, the stretch goal might be, can we do this? Is the market ready for this? Can we do this? And the answer is no. Well, I can't stretch that any further, but actually I've done really well to be able to come back to you and say, here's the answer, it's no. And so that we're back to that measurement piece there. What is it? How do we measure that? Because quite frankly, I might be worth double the bonus if we're going to go back to there, because I've said, don't go there yet. This is the research and we're not ready for this. So that's one piece that we have to bear in mind. The other piece, and the research is interesting here, stretch goals work. People like challenges. One of the conditions for high performance. And when you think about it, if you think about your top accomplishments, the things, in your career journey, the things that you are most proud of that you've accomplished, you didn't just wake up and say, done, yay. You worked really, really hard for them, and possibly with other people. In fact, probably other people were involved. There's back to our team piece again.
Yeah.
So the key in why I said leadership here is stretch goals work, but only if the leader is in full support. And by full support, that's visible support. So that is checking in, that is providing feed forward, it's providing recognition, and not recognition when you've got to the top rung of the ladder, it's along the way. And I think the magic, I don't know why this springs to mind, but I have a feeling it's every fortnight, 2 weeks. Sorry, there's another Englishism in there. It's every 2 weeks at least that needs to be happening for those big stretch goals.
Sorry, can you kind of double click on that one a little bit for me? When you talk every 2 weeks, what needs to be happening? Recognition?
So the recognition, the feedback, the feed forward. And that's, it's really arbitrary because some people it'll be weekly, we're back to this again, everybody's not the same. So I don't like those numbers, because now, you know, in your calendar every Monday, touch base on, know your people. And so when there is a stretch goal involved, I think the best question is, what do you need from me to succeed? And in the workplace, if we're running a stretch goal, your job is to report up or to report sideways, whatever that might be. I have to inform X, Y, and Z. How are we going to handle that? And if we have all those conversations up front, it gives the leader a window. Okay, it's Tuesday, I'm checking in. How's it going? What do you need? What's getting in the way? What's stopping you from spending time on this? What are the urgencies that are not letting you focus on this? And we just set ourselves up for success to provide that recognition and support along the way.
Okay, no, very good. Edgar's got a great comment here about, without at least 1 to 2 stretch goals, you'll never dent the universe. Great callback.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, need leaders to understand the backstory and details behind why goals are not met, et cetera. So I guess where I'm going on this one is, why do we call them stretch goals? Why don't we just call them goals?
Oh, fair.
And I'm getting hung up on the semantics of the word, maybe, is that if we're trying to redefine goal setting in terms of being able to be exciting, motivating, denting the universal, why don't we just call them goals and say this is what we're striving to do?
And yes, and have one. And I think you listed off, McChesney calls it a WIG, I think, wildly important goals. Somebody calls them big, hairy, audacious goals or whatever it might. Just have one at a time, because we're running at a pace that people can't keep up with anyway. And that's another important point, that capacity check-in. Do we actually have capacity to do this? Like, you got a family at the moment, they're isolating, they're testing positive. You've got elderly people in a care home that you can't get into. 200 emails by the time you get off this call, and we're overwhelmed. And so throwing in 3, you may as well just pull the ladder down and pop it away for a while. I think we have to be aware of that capacity. And a lot of that, different conversation for another Friday, what are we focusing on? What are we prioritizing? And how do we manage that piece?
Absolutely. And so I guess this brings me to another thought, is how do we, to your point, so much is going on. The pace of change in the past 2 years in some respects has been incredible. In other ways, there's been none. I've been sitting here for 2 years. Right. But how do you build into your process, as much as I don't necessarily want to talk about a process, the ability to change direction, change goals? I think something else that I see happen in organizations is they get frozen on, we've set our goals, these are our goals, right? And it seems like there's a fear of admitting we set the wrong goal, or we now know we're not going to make it. Like, how do you build that flexibility into goal setting? Maybe it's a real simple answer. Maybe I'm overthinking this, but
I think it is. I think it probably is quite a simple answer. So we mentioned beforehand, this is a two-way process. This is a conversation, and it's a continuous conversation. It's not once a year. It's not even once a quarter. It is a continuous conversation. And that allows us to be aware. It allows us to pay attention. And, if the boss says pivot.
That's
And
that's $5 in the swear jar. That word is not allowed this year anymore.
yeah, well, fair, absolutely fair. And we just, again, 2020 taught us that. And it's disheartening the number of companies that kept their performance management exactly the same and stuck to it in 2020.
Yeah.
And that because it was set in January and because it's set for the year, and that's what we're doing. And that shows us why process sometimes is not a winner.
Yeah.
But we were coping too in 2020. And so you could have been as simple as, okay, let's just press pause. It's not even a pivot. Let's just press pause. And that's okay too. Like, pause. Everything's taken off. This is madness. I cannot focus on this for the next 2 months. Great. Pause. Let's pick it up again. And then pick it up again. How are we doing? Is this still important? Do we still need this skill, this growth, whatever that piece is for you there?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And there was a comment in the chat, Tony, thank you. Yeah, it's basically, how do you overcome the whole sunk cost ownership? Like it's almost like you've set your goals and we're going to stick with it, but it's really the fallacy of sunk cost. And so, Jenny, this might be in the the strategies, but I'm just as a leader, how do you help your employees see their way through kind of that growth goal setting process, right? If you're talking with your team, we know what our business objectives are, but when we're talking about individual growth, I'm just wondering if you've got any thoughts. I know I'm springing this one on you, but I'm just any thoughts on how to help them around that? Because this is an interesting time of year to be thinking about it with everything that's going on. A lot of people are in that mindset in January. How do you really make that growth conversation meaningful?
So the first bit is exactly that. Have a conversation. And you mentioned earlier, it's difficult for some people because we're so used to in this conversation, oh, I'm not very good at this, I have to get better, because of all that ranking stuff that we did. And there's enough, we've known for long enough that, okay, sometimes we have these weaknesses and we do need to get better, but it doesn't need to be our sole focus. And so I'm always going to be an advocate of, where's your strengths and where would you like to grow within those strengths? And I think the thing for a leader is maybe we need a little bit of patience, because it's very, very possible they've never been asked before. And it's very, very possible that for you to actually own the career that you're in, have a say in it and say, I would like to grow here for the sake of, this is going to help you because, is sentences that just haven't been said out loud. And so, I think some of it is giving that container to contemplate that, be curious in that space, and take your time. Just because it's January doesn't mean we need to be done by January the 30th.
Yeah.
And so I use that word stretch that out a little bit more as well. And in there too, I think there's a piece for our perfectionists who are in the room. And our perfectionists often are our greatest procrastinators, because if they say, I want to grow at this, they want to be brilliant before they've done that whole learning piece within there. Yeah. And so for them, it's not about how high the bar is set. What it's about is tolerating the uncomfortable feelings of not being brilliant yet. And so that pays homage to, this isn't a 20-minute conversation. This is a nudge, a think, a chat, a nudge, a think, more of a chat, something like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. We also put that artificial constraint in there, right? Because a lot of organizations, have your goals in the system by the end of January, right? And so anyway, we do this to ourselves. So we're 8:45. I know there's a few other questions in the chat that I think I've seen roll by. I've seen question marks roll by. So we'll try and take a look at those after, and see if there's any answers that we can provide. We will do so in the follow-up. But I think, Jenny, it's time to kind of move on to our wrap and talk about, one big idea and so on.
Let's find it. One more time.
Yeah, great, folks. I've seen this chat has just been flying past, so I'm really curious to be able to go back and take a look at what's going on there. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. All right, so I think we have it up here now. Should be good. So the big idea is simple. If we pay attention, spend some time looking at this is the difference. And it is possible, it absolutely is possible. One of the things we'll add to the resources, Craig, I'll send it to you, is not a case study, just an example of a tomato plant that absolutely nails it in terms of setting goals and how they approach it. So we'll make sure that's available to you all. Have a read if you have time. 2 strategies. We always like to give you something that you can leave with. And here's our first one. It is difficult to put a sort of framework around this for you. In the slide deck that you'll receive, you'll see my version. It's not smart, it's not fast. It does use the acronym BEGIN, but it just gives us parameters to look at. And one of the things we need to be cognizant of is this growth. We've talked about this quite a bit this morning. So are you feeding your outcome? That's the top rung of your ladder, is your outcome. Are you feeding it with the right growth? There's the patience bit and the time part. And remember, people like getting better at things. Your job as a leader, pay attention, support them, recognize that piece. That ups everything. All those bits that we don't measure, the motivation, the engagement, those parts there. And then the second thing to really think about, and this one's easier to actually go away and do something, is if you're not talking about it, we're talking about more the work goals, but even those growth and performance goals, your people probably aren't even thinking. And this works flip side too. If you're an individual contributor, if you're not seeking feedback or feed forward, more importantly, if you're not making time to join the dots for your leader who is busy in their own right, they're not even thinking about it. So bring it into the conversation, have those conversations. 4DX, that's the book that I recommended, talks about a cadence of communication. They have a weekly version. It's pretty cool, worth checking out. And then that talking piece, it's not always verbal talking. Sometimes it's writing, sometimes it's a quick note, sometimes it's a Teams piece. This doesn't have to be book 15 minutes on our camera space. It can be different than that. And the other piece, this even works for New Year's resolutions. We keep so much of it in the back of our head. And you have 70,000 thoughts a day if you're an average adult. So get out of there, pop it on paper, pop it in Teams, pop it on your document, just somewhere, get it out of your head and actually into working there. And then our 3 questions to leave you with today. The first one there fits the last slide. What are you talking about? If these are important, make them part of your conversation every single day. Second one, how two-way is your process? Have you actually involved in that tomato plant they call Morningstar? Their employees do it all, and they do it all with each other. It's very cool. And then I love this last one. It's a great one just to start the day. What will your contribution be? And that could be contributing to the day job, the work goals, your own growth goals. What can I do today will take me one rung higher up.
Perfect.
There we go. And I think you've fed our chat with all of the links that people need for coming up. So our emails are there, and I'll hand it to you.
Yeah, no, perfect. And I did. And yeah, January 20th, I was so happy to get out of January. I started thinking about February 28th, but that's not it. It's January 28th. And there's a couple other items coming up as well. So thank you again for joining us. It's great to be back. And again, we really appreciate your support and your participation here. We get a ton out of these conversations and really appreciate you joining us. So have a great Friday. Have a great weekend. And Jenny, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, be safe, everybody. Thanks, Craig.
You bet. Take care.
Take care, everyone.